Hey everyone, welcome back to Bella Dark Tales. Tonight's story was sent in by Ethan Cole from Whitehorse, Yukon. Ethan said this happened during one of the summers he spent working seasonal contracts across the far north. And out of everything he's ever seen in his life, this is the one thing he still can't explain without feeling sick. He told me to use his first name, and he told me not to change what matters. He called this one. I'm a park ranger in Alaska. There are strange rules. I took the job because I thought silence would be good for me. That's the easiest way to explain it. Before Alaska, I was living outside Spokane, doing security shifts at a warehouse and trying to pretend I wasn't wasting my 20s. My days were all the same. Work all night, sleep half the morning, wake up feeling behind in life, scroll job listings, lie to my mother when she called, and tell her I was figuring things out. Then I saw the listing for a seasonal ranger position in Alaska. Not a famous park. Not one of the places tourists talk about. It was in a protected wilderness area so remote that even on the website, the map looked incomplete. The posting said they needed someone with basic wilderness first aid, firearms familiarity, and the ability to work in isolation for extended periods. It also said housing would be provided on site, and because I was desperate enough, housing provided sounded almost as attractive as the pay. I applied thinking there was no chance they'd pick me. They called 3 days later. The interview was short and weird. The man on the phone introduced himself as Superintendent Harris. He asked if I was comfortable being away from towns for weeks at a time. I said yes. He asked if I had any issue following protocol exactly as written even when it didn't make sense to me. I said no. He asked if I believed every dangerous thing in the wilderness had claws or teeth. I remember laughing a little at that one, because I thought he was trying to sound clever. He didn't laugh back. He just repeated the question. I said, "No, sir." There was a long pause, then he said, "Good. Can you be in Anchorage in 6 days?" That was it. I packed almost everything I owned into storage, lied to my family, and told them I'd be working in a park with decent facilities, and flew to Alaska with a duffel bag, a backpack, and the kind of optimism only people with no real plan can afford. From Anchorage, I got on a small bush plane with supplies and 2 other workers headed to different sites. One of them was a fisheries guy who slept the entire flight. The other was an older woman in a green jacket who introduced herself as Mara. She looked at my brand new boots, my clean backpack, and the paperback novel sticking out of my side pocket, and she smiled in that tired way older people smile when they can already tell you're about to learn something hard. "You the new ranger?" she asked over the engine noise. I told her yeah. She nodded slowly. "North District?" I said yes again. That smile disappeared. She looked out the scratched little plane window at the endless spread of dark trees and said, "Don't go outside if you hear whistling." I actually thought she was joking. I smiled and waited for the punchline. There wasn't one. She never looked back at me after that. The plane landed on a rough strip that was basically flattened dirt and gravel cut into the wilderness. A truck was waiting there with the park insignia on the door. The driver was a broad, square-faced man in his 50s with a gray beard and a tan cap pulled low over his eyes. He introduced himself as Leon Harris. Same guy from the phone. He shook my hand once, firmly, and loaded my bag into the truck without asking if I needed help. The drive to the ranger station took a little over an hour. I remember almost all of it because of how quiet it was. Not peaceful quiet. Wrong quiet. There's a difference, and I learned it fast. Peaceful quiet is a lake before sunrise. Snow falling. Empty roads in winter. Wrong quiet is when you feel like the world has paused because something doesn't want to be overheard. The road wound through black spruce and paper birch, over little rises and along a river that flashed silver between the trees. We didn't pass a single vehicle. No cabins, no lodges, no campsites. Just trees and rock and a sky that somehow felt too wide. About halfway there, I asked Harris how many rangers worked the station. "For with you," he said. "That's it. That's enough if people listen." I thought he meant tourists. I said, "Does it get busy out here?" He kept his eyes on the road. "Sometimes." That was how every conversation with Harris went. Like he knew the full answer to everything and only intended to give you the smallest surviving piece. The station sat in a clearing near the edge of a broad glacial river. There was one main building with solar panels, a radio mast, 2 equipment sheds, and 3 small cabins raised on pilings. Beyond that was more forest. To the west, maybe half a mile out, the land climbed into a low ridge line. To the east, the river bent away into a gray braided spread that looked almost metallic under the clouds. It should have felt beautiful. It mostly felt exposed. The other 3 staff were already there. Nate, who was in his early 30s and had the worn-out look of someone who slept badly for years. Carla, late 40s maybe, all sharp eyes and efficient movements. And Owen, the youngest besides me, a local hire from Fairbanks who smiled a lot but never for very long. They welcomed me politely. No one was rude. No one was warm either. I got shown my cabin, which was small but clean. Narrow bed, metal stove, desk, radio handset on the wall, emergency flare box, and a laminated sheet thumbtacked directly beside the doorframe. At first I thought it was a fire plan or evacuation route. Then I read the title. North District Operational Rules. I stood there with my bag still on my shoulder and read all 21 rules in silence. Some were normal. Do not hike patrol sectors alone during heavy fog. Do not discharge firearms unless wildlife or human life is in immediate danger. Maintain radio contact every 30 minutes during night searches. Then there were the others. If you hear whistling between 12 a.m. and 3 a.m., do not respond and do not open the cabin door. If someone approaches the station from the river after dark, make visual confirmation before allowing entry. Do not follow any voice calling your name from beyond the floodplain markers. If the radio receives a transmission identifying itself as Station 4, do not answer. Never remain on the south footbridge after sunset. If you see a person standing on the ridge tree facing away from you, leave the area immediately and report the sighting to Superintendent Harris. Do not look into the windows of cabin 2 if the curtains are closed and a light is visible inside. That one made me actually laugh, alone in the cabin. I remember shaking my head and thinking, okay, this is how they mess with the seasonal guy. It was too specific. Too theatrical. I put my bag down and went back to the main building, intending to joke about it. Nobody joked back. Carla was at the table cleaning a rifle. Nate was inventorying med kits. Harris was writing in a ledger. Owen was making coffee. I picked up the laminated copy sitting by the radio and said, "So who wrote this, Stephen King?" No one answered for a second. Then Harris said very calmly, "You read every line?" I said yes. "Then follow every line." I looked at Owen, expecting at least a grin from somebody. He avoided my eyes. That should have been enough for me. Even then, It should have been enough to stop treating the whole place like some weird initiation ritual. But I still didn't get it. Not really. The first week was almost normal. Patrols, trail maintenance, helping a pair of German hikers who underestimated the cold, checking boundary markers, logging bear movement near salmon streams. Rio Ranger work. Good work, honestly. The kind that tires your body out enough to quiet your head. If not for the rules, and the way everyone checked the time after dark, I probably would have settled in quickly. There was one other thing I noticed early on. No one used the South Footbridge after sunset. Not ever. The station and cabins were on the north side of the river. The footbridge crossed a narrower branch farther down, connecting to a maintenance trail and an old observation platform that wasn't on the public maps anymore. The bridge wasn't unsafe. It was old, but solid. Still, every evening, no matter what job was unfinished out there, everybody came back before the sun dropped behind the ridge. One evening on my 5th day, I asked Nate why. He was washing a pan in the sink. Because the rule says not to. I said, yeah, but why is it a rule? He dried his hands and looked at me with a kind of exhausted irritation, like he was deciding whether I was stupid or just new. Because Martin went out there at dusk 9 years ago, he said. I frowned. Martin who? The superintendent before Harris. What happened? Nate held my gaze for a couple seconds too long. He came back. Then he walked away. That night I lay in bed thinking about that answer. He came back. Not he died. Not he disappeared. He came back. I didn't sleep well. It was still broad summer light outside, though dimmer, when I woke up sometime after midnight to the sound of whistling. 3 notes. Soft. Slow. Human. I sat upright instantly. For a few seconds I thought I was dreaming, because the sound was so clear, so deliberate, and so close that it seemed impossible. It came again, not from far out in the woods, but from right outside my cabin. Maybe 10 feet from the wall. 3 notes. Pause. 3 notes. Then silence. I held my breath. The cabin felt smaller than it had an hour earlier. I looked at the door, then at the dark little window above the desk. The curtain was thin. If someone was standing outside, I might be able to see their outline. I started to get up. Then I saw the laminated rules beside the door, pale in the moonlight. If you hear whistling between 12 a.m. and 3 a.m., do not respond and do not open the cabin door. I sat there listening so hard that my ears started making their own little static hiss. Nothing. Then, from farther off this time, maybe at the edge of the clearing, the whistle came again. 3 notes. Somehow it was worse farther away. When it sounded close, I could pretend maybe it was a person. Some idiot hiker. Owen trying to scare me. From farther away, it sounded like a signal. I don't know how long I sat there. 10 minutes, maybe 20. The whistle came twice more, each time from a slightly different direction. Never rushing. Never overlapping. Just letting me know it was still there. Eventually, I heard a second sound. Not from outside. From inside the wall radio. A click. Like somebody lifting a handset at another station. Then dead silence. I didn't touch the radio. I didn't move at all until dawn began turning the window gray. At breakfast, nobody needed me to explain what happened. One look at my face and Owen asked, "First whistle?" I said, "You all heard that?" Carla shook her head. "Not always everyone." Sometimes it picks one cabin. I waited for somebody to explain what it meant. No one did. Harris poured coffee and said, "And you stayed inside?" I said yes. Good. That was it. No reassurance. No joking. No discussion. Just confirmation that I had followed the rule and therefore survived the night. That word never got used out loud, but it settled into my thoughts anyway. Survived. By the second week I started seeing how the rules controlled everything. Every patrol route had little timing adjustments built into it that nobody called strange because they were so used to them. Nobody was on the ridge trail within an hour of sunset. Nobody approached the old floodplain cabins unless Harris authorized it. If a hiker reported hearing someone in the trees but couldn't see them, that hiker was escorted back to the station and quietly encouraged to leave the district by morning. The official reasons were always practical. Wildlife concern. Terrain hazard. Unstable ground. But once you lived there, you could feel the shape of the real reasons pressing through the cover story. One afternoon, about 12 days in, we had our first serious visitor issue. A father and teenage son came into the station around 4 in the afternoon, looking pale and angry. They'd been hiking a marked trail west of the ridge and wanted to report a creep in the woods. The father did most of the talking. He said they kept spotting a man standing off-trail among the trees maybe 70 yards back. Dark clothes. Tall. Never moving. At first he thought it was another hiker. Then he realized the man was in the same posture each time they saw him, no matter how much ground they covered. Carla asked, very carefully, "Did you ever see his face?" The father hesitated. "No. He was turned around, I think." The room went completely still. Not dramatically. Just all the little noises stopping at once. Pen set down. Chair shift ending. Radio crackle suddenly sounding too loud. Harris came out of his office and asked them exactly where they saw the man. The father pointed on the map. Harris nodded once and told Owen to fuel the truck. That was the first time I got to see what happened when one of the rules activated, for lack of a better word. Everything became precise. Controlled. The father thought they were reporting a suspicious person. The staff acted like they'd just been told a sinkhole opened under a school bus. Harris asked the son, who hadn't said a word yet, "Did he wave to you?" The kid swallowed and nodded. That got a reaction from Nate I didn't like at all. He actually muttered "Jesus" under his breath. We drove out there with the father and son in the truck bed bench seats and found the exact pullout where they'd started the trail. Harris did not go in after the figure. We didn't search. We didn't call out. He simply had Owen and me walk the father and son back to the station, while he and Carla remained behind long enough to close the trail. By the time we returned with blankets and hot coffee for the visitors, the district map by the front desk had a temporary closure magnet on the entire Western Ridge sector. That night I asked Owen what the hell that was really about. He stared at the table for a while, then said, "Have you ever had the feeling somebody wants your attention and you know better than to give it?" I said, "That doesn't answer anything. It's the closest answer you're gonna get." He rubbed both hands down his face. "You know what the worst part is? The first time I saw one, I thought it was a lost hunter. You know what I wanted to do? Help him. That's how it gets you. Everything about it makes you want to do the wrong thing." I laughed once, weakly. "You're talking like it's an animal." Owen looked at me and said, "No, I'm not." The first really bad thing happened on day 17. I remember the number because Harris wrote it into the incident log 3 separate times. The morning was cold and windy. Clouds moving fast, river chopped up and gray. Nate and I were sent to check markers near the south footbridge while Owen stayed back at the station with Carla. Harris had gone upriver before dawn to inspect a collapsed game camera post. The footbridge looked harmless in daylight. Narrow metal grating, cable sides, swaying just enough to remind you it crossed fast water. On the other side, the old maintenance path cut along the gravel bar and into a stand of stunted spruce. Past that was an observation platform, weathered and half-rotten, that no tourists were supposed to use anymore. We did our checks, logged 2 damaged markers, and started back. That was when Nate froze with one boot on the bridge. I almost ran into him. "What?" He held up a hand for silence. At first I thought he was listening for a bear. Then I heard it too. Not whistling. A radio. Very faint. Through static. Somebody speaking. The sound was coming from the other side of the river, not from our handsets. Like a portable radio left on in the woods. Nate slowly stepped backward off the bridge. His face had gone pale in a way I hadn't seen before. "Don't cross," he said. I looked around. "It's probably Harris." "It's not Harris." The voice came again, clearer this time, carried by the wind and the water. "Copy that, Station 4, movement near." Then static swallowed the rest. I felt my skin crawl. Not because of the words themselves. Because of the certainty in Nate's face. I said, "Somebody's messing with us." Nate actually grabbed the front of my jacket. "Listen to me. You hear that designation again, you do not answer, you do not repeat it, and you do not go looking for the source. Understand?" I nodded because of the way he said it, not because I understood anything. We backed away from the bridge and returned to the station without finishing the last 2 markers. When Harris got back, Nate told him what we heard. Harris didn't seem surprised. He just asked what time and from which side of the river. He wrote it down and locked the incident book in his office. I couldn't stand it anymore. After dinner I cornered Carla outside the equipment shed and told her straight. "Either tell me what's going on here, or I'm on the next flight out." She stood there for a second with a coil of rope in her hands, watching me like she was measuring how much truth I could carry. Then she said, "This district used to have another substation." I waited. "It was decommissioned 23 years ago after spring flooding cut it off. Officially, that's all there is to it." "Officially?" She looked toward the river. "Unofficially, the last crew posted there kept reporting things in the woods. Voices. Figures. People showing up where there should have been no people. Then the radio calls started. Calls from themselves. Same voices. Same men. Wrong times, wrong weather, wrong locations." I said nothing. Carla continued. "Eventually one of them answered a call he believed was from his partner. After that, the station stopped responding for almost 6 hours. I asked her what happened in those 6 hours. She gave a tiny shrug that was somehow worse than if she'd looked frightened. When contact resumed, they said everything was fine. When the main station reached them by boat, it wasn't fine." My mouth felt dry. "What did they find?" She looked at me then, very directly. "Enough to build the rules." That answer should have made me quit. Instead, like an idiot, it made me want details. I had started the job trying to get away from the mess in my own head. By then, the park had given me something else to think about every minute. Fear, confusion, pattern, dread. It was addictive in the sickest possible way. Every strange thing made me more certain there had to be an explanation. And the more the others avoided speaking plainly, the more I wanted to corner the truth and force it into a shape I could understand. That impulse almost got me killed. 3 nights later, just after 2 a.m., my radio clicked on by itself. No tone first. No call signal. Just a wash of static and then a man's voice, calm and clear. North District, this is Station 4. Respond. I was instantly awake. The radio was mounted above the desk beside the window. Moonlight lit half the room. My pulse was slamming so hard I could feel it in my throat. For one insane second, instinct took over. Somebody's calling, answer it. Then I remembered the rule. If the radio receives a transmission identifying itself as Station 4, do not answer. The voice came again. North District, do you copy? It sounded close. Not emotionally close. Acoustically close. Like the speaker was right outside the cabin wall instead of on a transmission. I got out of bed and backed away from the radio. The static crackled. Then the voice changed. Still male. Still calm. But now it said my name. Ethan. Pick up. I went cold all over. I had never used my first name on open radio. Harris almost always used call signs, and within the station they usually just knocked on cabin doors. There was no reason for anyone outside the staff to know which cabin was mine. The voice said, "We have your superintendent on the line." Then, after a pause perfectly in Harris's voice, "Ethan, answer the damn radio." I can still describe the exact feeling that went through me then, because I've never felt anything like it before or since. Not panic. Recognition. Not of the voice. Of the trap. Something in me knew with absolute certainty that if I picked up that handset, I would be doing more than breaking a rule. I would be letting something notice me in a different way. The radio hissed for a few seconds. Then I heard the whistle outside. 3 notes. Not from the clearing. Right outside my window. I didn't look. I don't know why I had enough sense not to, but I didn't. I just stood there in the middle of the cabin with my hands shaking and stared at the floorboards until the static finally cut out and the whistling moved away into the trees. At breakfast Harris already knew. He took one look at me and asked, "Did it use your name?" I said yes. No one reacted except Owen, who shut his eyes for a second like he had a headache. Harris asked, "Did you answer?" "No." "Did you look outside?" "No." He nodded once. "Then you're all right." That phrasing again. All right. Like the line between being fine and not being fine was thinner than I realized. That day the weather turned ugly. Wind from the northwest, dark clouds, freezing drizzle by evening. We stayed mostly inside, working on reports and maintenance. Around sunset, Harris called us all to the table and spread out an old paper map, older than the one mounted on the wall. There was a section south of the footbridge marked with pencil XS and a ring around what looked like an old cabin site. He tapped it. "No one goes in here alone. No one goes in after dark. If any visitor is ever found in this zone, you bring them out and you do not explain why they were removed. Understood?" We all said yes. I asked what was there. He said, "Old flood cabins." "Anything else?" He stared at me. "Enough." Later, when the others had gone to their cabins, I stayed in the office pretending to finish inventory sheets while Harris put away records. I was waiting for him to leave the room so I could maybe get a look at the incident log. I knew it was a stupid idea, but by then stupid ideas felt like my real job description. Harris caught me glancing at the locked cabinet. "Curiosity gets expensive here," he said without looking up. I said, "If I'm expected to follow these rules, I deserve to know what they're protecting me from." That finally made him look at me. His face was tired in a way I hadn't seen before. Not irritated. Not hard. Just tired. "Do you know what most people get wrong about wilderness?" he asked. I didn't answer. "They think danger is the bear they can see, the storm they can measure, the cliff edge they can map. Real danger out here is whatever teaches you not to trust your own good intentions." He closed the cabinet. "Every rule in this district exists because somebody decent made a reasonable choice and paid for it. That enough for now?" It wasn't enough. But it was the first answer that felt true. 2 days later, we got a storm hard enough to trap us at the station. Rain all night, river rising, visibility low. The kind of weather that turns trails into soup and makes every tree look farther away than it is. We spent most of the day indoors. Around noon the power dipped twice and the backup battery clicked on. Around 3 in the afternoon, a call came from a satellite emergency beacon somewhere west of the ridge. Single ping, then no follow-up. Harris sent Owen and me with a truck and rescue packs to check it before weather got worse. On the way out, Carla pulled me aside and said, very quietly, "Be back before dusk." I told her we would. She held my sleeve for a second. "No matter what you hear, no matter who you think you hear." That stayed with me the whole drive. The beacon led us to a muddy turnout near a hunting access trail. We found no injured hiker, no camp, nothing except an emergency locator clipped to a branch at shoulder height. Brand new. Activated manually. Owen swore under his breath and turned it off. "False trigger?" He shook his head. "Maybe. Maybe bait." That word again. Everything in this district was either a rule or bait. We started back immediately, but the weather got worse fast. Sheets of rain. Road turning slick. Light draining out of the sky an hour earlier than it should have under the clouds. About 15 minutes from the station, we came around a bend and saw someone standing in the road ahead. Owen hit the brakes so hard the truck fishtailed. The figure stood dead center in the road, maybe 100 feet away. Too tall to be a child, too still to be somebody flagging for help. Dark jacket. Hands at the sides. Facing away from us. Rain hammered the windshield. Either of us spoke. Then, very slowly, the figure raised one arm and beckoned without turning around. Once. Twice. I felt something so primal and immediate that it bypassed thought completely. Every instinct screamed that this was wrong in a way human bodies aren't supposed to be wrong. Owen threw the truck into reverse. The figure took one step toward us. Still facing away. Still somehow coming closer. Owen didn't wait for a second step. He backed around the bend, turned the truck in a spray of mud, and drove the rest of the way to the station so fast I thought we were going into the ditch twice. When we burst in, Harris didn't ask what happened. He just got up, walked to the window, checked the time, and said, "Everybody inside the main building tonight." That was new. The cabins were safer, I'd assumed, because they were separate. But nobody argued. We moved our sleeping bags into the office and radio room, locked the doors, checked the rifles, and covered the windows. Covered the windows. That was another thing nobody had told me before. Whatever was out there, Harris didn't even want it accidentally seen. The storm went on into the night. Wind, rain, branches scraping the siding. The radio mast groaning in gusts. Around 11:30, Owen finally whispered from his sleeping bag. "You see the hand?" I said yes. No one else answered. Just after midnight, the whistling started. Not one source this time. Several. Different distances. Different directions around the building. 3 notes. Pause. 3 notes. Then, after a while, one of them changed the pattern. It did 4. The room went very still. I heard Nate sit up. He whispered, "That's new." Nobody spoke after that. At 12:41, the radio clicked. Static flooded the room. Then a voice said, in perfect Carla tone, "Open the west door." Carla was 3 feet away from me. I turned toward her in the dark and could make out the pale shape of her face. She didn't move. The radio said, this time in Owen's voice, "Something's wrong outside." Then, in my own voice, "Let me in." That almost broke me. Not hearing my name. Not even hearing Harris's voice before. Hearing myself from the radio in the dark while I was still breathing in the room was something else, entirely. It made the world feel loose. Unfastened. The radio went on cycling through voices for maybe 5 minutes. Staff, strangers, a woman sobbing once, a child asking for help, Harris's predecessor maybe, I don't know. It all blurred together under the storm. Then it stopped. And something knocked on the west door. 3 knocks. Slow. Deliberate. Human-sounding. No one moved. 3 more knocks. Then a man's voice from outside, muffled by rain. "Ranger." I don't know whose voice it was. I only know it sounded exhausted, freezing, and real enough that every decent instinct in me screamed to help. There are sounds the human body is built to respond to. Fear, pain, pleading. That voice hit all of them. "Ranger," it said again. "Please." Harris stood up, rifle in hand, and went to the little peephole cover in the inner hallway. He did not open the cover. He just stood there listening. The voice moved closer to the door. "I'm hurt." A few seconds later it said, much softer, "Leon." Not Ranger. Not help. Leon. Harris closed his eyes for just a second. Then he spoke loudly enough for whoever was outside to hear. "You are not welcome here." The knocking stopped. The storm kept hammering the building. For maybe a full minute, there was nothing else. Then from somewhere above us on the roof came the sound of footsteps crossing slowly from one end of the station to the other. That was the first night I understood, really understood, that none of this was folklore among bored rangers. It was management. Containment. We weren't superstitious caretakers out there. We were custodians of a place where certain things happened often enough to require protocol. By morning the storm had passed. We checked the exterior in teams of 2. Mud everywhere. Broken branches. River high and ugly. No footprints at the west door. But there were wet marks on the roof edge above the entrance, spaced almost like footprints, except too narrow and too long, as if something with human weight had balanced there on the fronts of its feet. No one commented on them. We all saw. Nobody commented. Around noon, Harris told me to help Carla inventory the old storage shed beside the floodplain trail. Maybe he wanted to keep me busy. Maybe he wanted me watched. Either way, we went. The shed was older than the station and smelled like oil, damp wood, and mouse nests. While Carla worked through boxes of flares and climbing hardware, I found a drawer unit full of old paper records. Permits, repair logs, weather sheets. And under those, a photograph. It was faded and water-warped around the edges. 4 men standing beside a smaller ranger station that must have been the original South substation. They were smiling the way people in old work photos smile, squinting into daylight, pretending the camera doesn't matter. On the back, in blue ink, somebody had written, "Last week before closure." Below that were 4 first names. One of them was Martin. Not Superintendent Martin. Just Martin. I took the photo to Carla and asked if this was the substation crew. She looked at it and went still. Then she took it from me and slid it back into the drawer. "Don't dig through old paper unless Harris says to." "That one of the men answered Station 4? I asked. She stared at me a second too long. "We all answer one way or another." That didn't make sense then. Later it would. That night I didn't sleep. Not really. Every sound became a pattern I tried to decode. Every gust against the siding became maybe a hand, maybe a branch, maybe a person standing where no person should be. Around 1 a.m. I almost convinced myself the fear was doing more damage than whatever was outside. Then at 1:17, very faint, from somewhere near the river, I heard somebody calling my name. Not over the radio. Out in the dark. Just once. "Ethan." It sounded like my younger brother. He'd never been to Alaska in his life. I stayed in bed with both hands clamped over my mouth until dawn. That was the last night I still believed I could understand the place before it changed me. Because the next day, Harris took me to the old floodplain cabins. And that was where I saw the first real proof that the rules weren't made out of fear. They were made out of history. The floodplain cabins weren't on any tourist map. If you looked at the official park brochure, the entire section south of the footbridge was marked as seasonal marshland with unstable ground. That was technically true. It just wasn't the whole truth. Harris drove us as far as the maintenance trail allowed, then we went the rest of the way on foot. The weather had cleared, but the ground was still wet from the storm, and every step made a sucking sound in the mud. The river was lower there, split into thinner channels around long bars of pale gravel. Beyond that, the land rose into a patch of thin spruce and brush, with a smell like wet moss and cold metal. I expected abandoned cabins in the normal sense. Rotting wood. Fallen roofs. Broken windows from weather and time. What we came to looked worse than abandoned. It looked avoided. There were 3 structures still standing, if you could call them that. One had collapsed in on itself. Another leaned so badly it looked like a hard wind could finish it. The last one still stood upright with a roof mostly intact, gray boards weathered almost silver, windows boarded from the outside. No birds. No insects. No wind in the trees, even though I could hear it further off. Harris stopped before we reached them, and handed me a pair of gloves. "Don't touch bare wood," he said. I took the gloves and asked the question I'd been carrying around for days. "Why are we really here?" He looked at the standing cabin and said, "Because you're staying." That answer took a second to register. Then I realized what he meant. He wasn't showing me this because he trusted me. He was showing me because the job had already crossed a line. Because if I stayed on at the station, sooner or later I was going to need to know this place existed. We walked toward the only cabin that still stood upright. There was a chain through the door handles and a heavy padlock on it. The boards over the windows were newer than the structure itself. Not new, but maintained. replaced when needed. That made my stomach tighten. Nobody maintains a sealed building unless they're making sure it stays sealed. Harris crouched by the front step and pointed at a line scratched into the wood beside the threshold. It was almost hidden under grime and weathering. Numbers stacked vertically. 3, 5, 2, 1. I frowned. What's that? Occupancy count. I looked at him. There were 4 men in the photo. There were. I waited for him to continue. He didn't. Instead, he stood and led me around to the back of the cabin. The ground there was churned with old boot prints that rain hadn't fully erased, along with deeper marks I couldn't make sense of. There was a second door in the rear wall, also chained shut. Beside it was something nailed to the siding. A little metal placard. No official marking. No park insignia. Just a line of stamped letters. Do not open for voices. I stared at it longer than I should have. Then I said, "What happened here?" Harris looked past me into the trees, like checking whether anything was close enough to listen. "The flood cut this place off one spring," he said. "Supplies delayed. Radio intermittent. 4-man crews stayed longer than they should have. By the time anybody reached them, 1 man was gone, 1 was injured, and 2 were insisting the missing one had been walking around outside the cabin for 2 nights after he disappeared." I felt the hairs on my arms lift under my jacket. "You said the station stopped responding for 6 hours. It did. What happened in those 6 hours? Harris's jaw tightened. "The official report says communications failure." "And unofficially?" He gave me a look that said I already knew the answer to that question better than he could explain. I looked back at the placard. Do not open for voices. How many people broke that rule? He said nothing for a few seconds. Then he said, "Enough." He unlocked either door. He opened nothing. He just walked me around the cabin perimeter, showing me details like I was being trained on dangerous equipment. The nails driven across the window frames. The old scorch marks low on one wall. The lengths of wire strung between 2 trees behind the cabin where bells had once been hung. And then, on the rear corner of the building, a line carved into the wood from shoulder height all the way down near the foundation. Not straight. Not random either. It curved slightly, like something sharp had been dragged slowly down the wall by a hand that started high and ended near the ground. I asked what made it. Harris said, "Nobody saw it happen." That was the whole tour. On the walk back, I asked the question I'd been avoiding because I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. "What are they?" Harris kept walking. "Not all one thing." I almost stopped in the trail. "What does that mean?" "It means people want one explanation because one explanation feels manageable. You call it an animal, a person, a weather effect, a sickness, a haunting, whatever helps you sleep. But this district doesn't behave like one problem. It behaves like overlap." "Overlap of what?" He didn't look at me. "Things that want to be noticed." That night I wrote a letter to my mother I never mailed. Not because I thought I was about to die. Because for the first time in my life, I felt completely cut off from ordinary people. Even if I got on a plane the next day and flew home, what would I say? "Sorry I left for Alaska and now I work in a place where the woods imitate voices and the abandoned cabins have rules nailed to them?" I wrote 3 pages and tore them up. The next week things got worse in a way that was harder to explain because almost none of it happened directly to me. That sounds safer than it was. Sometimes seeing what a place does to other people is worse than suffering it yourself. A married couple from Alberta came in on a routine permit check and left before sunset because the husband said he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was standing behind their camper whenever he stepped away from it. A solo backpacker came off the Western Trail white as chalk and told Owen he kept hearing somebody pacing him from the treeline for 6 straight miles. He never saw anyone, but whenever he stopped walking, the sound stopped too. Then Carla started having headaches. Not ordinary headaches. She described them as pressure, like altitude sickness without the nausea. They came whenever she spent too long near the South Footbridge, or the old floodplain zone. She said nothing about it at first. I only found out because I walked into the supply room one afternoon, and saw her bracing both hands on the shelf with her eyes shut while Owen stood there with a bottle of aspirin. "You okay?" I asked. She straightened too fast and said yes. Owen looked at her, then at me. "It's back, isn't it?" she said. "Just pressure." That word stuck with me because it was the same one I would use later when it started happening to me. Around then, Harris began checking the station windows every evening before dark. Not locking them. Checking them. Making sure curtains were arranged a certain way. Making sure nothing reflective faced outward. One evening I asked why the reflective surfaces mattered. He said, "Because some things here learn faster when they can see themselves trying." That was the kind of sentence I had stopped pretending was normal. By then I had also stopped asking myself whether I believed any of this. Belief had nothing to do with it. You can believe a fire is impossible and still get burned by it. Whatever was wrong with that district didn't need my acceptance to operate. The incident that changed everything happened on a Tuesday. I remember that because supply flights usually came on Fridays, and Tuesday meant the station felt especially cut off. 4 days to the next plane if anything went bad. It was just after noon when a man walked into the station from the riverside. Not unusual in itself. People came in from the trail sometimes tired, muddy, needing directions. What made it unusual was that nobody had seen him approach. The station clearing was open enough that you could usually spot a person from a few hundred yards away unless weather was terrible. That day visibility was perfect. Bright, cold sun. Clear sky. And still, 1 second the doorway was empty and the next there was a man standing in it. Mid-40s maybe. Heavy beard. Old red jacket. No pack. He looked exhausted. More than exhausted. Used up. Harris was at the front desk, and I saw something pass across his face so quickly I almost missed it. Recognition, but not the good kind. The man said, "You got coffee?" Harris said, "What's your name?" The man smiled faintly. "Thought you'd ask if I was okay first." Carla was already moving without seeming to. Just edging closer to the radio, casual on the surface, ready underneath. The man took 1 step inside. Mud fell from his boots. No, not mud. Silt. River silt, pale and fine. Harris said, louder this time, "Name." The man looked around the room. His eyes passed over each of us like he was taking attendance. When they got to me, they lingered a little too long. Then he said, "Tom Weller." Nobody reacted except Harris, who said, very calmly, "No." The man's smile faded. A weird stillness came over the room. Not like a fight was about to happen. Like gravity had thickened. The man said, "That's who I am." Harris took 1 step forward. "Tom Weller drowned 21 years ago." The man stared at him for another second. Then he looked almost embarrassed, like he'd made a social mistake. "Right," he said softly. "I forgot." I have replayed the next few seconds in my head many times, and the only reason I think I remember them clearly is because fear makes some details carve themselves into you. Carla hit the radio alarm. Owen grabbed my shoulder and pulled me back. And the man in the doorway did something small but impossible. He blinked, and when his eyes opened again, they were looking at us from the wrong angle. Not crossed. Not rolled back. Wrong. As if his face had stayed where it was, but his attention had shifted to a place half a foot to the side of his skull. Harris shouted one word. Outside. Not to the man. To us. We moved. Fast. Not out of the building, but back from the doorway as Harris advanced. The man in the red jacket stepped backward over the threshold onto the porch with perfect obedience, then kept stepping backward down the stairs and across the clearing, never turning around. By the time he reached the edge of the trees, he was moving too smoothly to mistake for any human being. Then he was gone. Just trees again. Harris closed and barred the door. No one spoke for a full minute. Finally I said, "Who was Tom Weller?" Harris breathed out through his nose and said, "A ranger." That wasn't the worst part. The worst part came when we checked the porch. There were prints in the silt where the man had stood. Bare footprints. Facing inward toward the station. As if he had walked there backwards. That afternoon Harris pulled out the incident log and let me read exactly one page. It was an older entry, copy from older records. No names except initials. No speculation. Just observations. Male subject approached substation at 1410 hours identifying himself as TW despite official record of death by drowning previous season. Subject requested entry. Subject voice consistent with archived staff recollection. Subject displayed abnormal gait when refused and withdrew in reverse orientation. Contact maintained no visible distress during backward movement over uneven terrain. At the bottom of the page, handwritten in darker ink much later, was a note. Do not allow river returners to choose the conversation. I handed the page back with my fingers shaking. That night no one slept in the cabins. No storm. No excuse. Harris just said we were all staying in the main building and nobody argued. Around midnight the pressure Carla had described started in my head. Not pain exactly. A fullness, like all the air around me had become heavy and was pressing through my skull. Sounds felt too close. The room seemed both too small and somehow far away at the same time. I stood from the cot in the radio room and nearly lost my balance. Carla looked at me from her chair by the desk and said, "You feel it?" I nodded. She got up, crossed the room, and shut the interior office door even though it was already open and not bothering anyone. "Less openings helps," she said. "Openings to what?" She didn't answer. The pressure eased around 1 in the morning. That was also when the radio clicked on. Not a full transmission. Just a burst of static, then silence, then another burst. Harris was awake immediately. He went to the desk and turned the volume all the way down without shutting the unit off. I whispered, "Why not just kill it?" "Because sometimes it notices." That sentence bothered me so much I didn't even have room for fear while I was thinking about it. Sometimes it notices. He was talking about the radio like an animal you don't want to startle. Or maybe not the radio. The silence stretched. Then from the dark office behind us came a soft knocking on the inside of the closed door. 3 knocks. Every muscle in my back tightened. Carla said something under her breath I didn't catch. The knocking came again. 3 knocks. Slow, patient, exactly the same spacing as before. We were all in the radio room. No one was in the office. Harris didn't move. The third set of knocks came with my name spoken softly between the second and third tap. Ethan. I have never felt my body try so hard to turn toward a sound. It wasn't curiosity. It was deeper than that. Recognition, maybe? The voice was my mother's. Not a rough imitation. Not close enough to fool somebody at a distance. My mother's actual voice, as clearly as if she'd been standing 6 inches from the other side of the door. Owen, Harris said quietly. Owen crossed the room without looking at the office door and flipped on a battery lantern hanging near the back shelves. Just one. The yellow light changed the room enough that the pressure in my head eased a little. The knocking stopped. That taught me something new. Dark helped it. Or at least darkness helped something. We kept the lanterns on the rest of the night. The next morning, Harris assigned me and Owen to replace a trail camera near the western ridge. Before we left, he handed Owen a folded paper map and said, "If you hear your own voice, leave the unit and come back." I said, "Excuse me?" Harris only repeated it. "If either of you hears your own voice in the woods, leave the unit and come back." We took the truck out in a silence that didn't break until the road got rough enough to force us slow. Then I said, "How is that even a sentence you had ready?" Owen kept his eyes on the road. "You stop being surprised at the categories after a while." That doesn't answer anything. He gave me a tired little smile. "Yeah. Welcome to North District." The camera post was a mile and a half off the road down a game path that cut through low brush and black spruce. We reached it by late morning. The old camera housing was bent, its strap torn. No claw marks. No bite damage. It looked more like something had tried to twist it off and changed its mind halfway through. Owen replaced the unit while I checked the area. I found tracks, but they were a mess. Moose, fox, something smaller. Then one line of marks in the soft ground that stopped me. Footprints again. Bare. Deep at the heel, light at the toes. Backward. I called Owen over. He crouched beside me and just stared for a second. Then he said, "We're done." I pointed at the camera. "You haven't even tested it." "We're done." On the walk back, the woods felt different. Not active exactly. Focused. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see a person just at the edge of vision. Halfway to the truck I heard it. My own voice. From off to the left through the trees. Not shouting. Not panicked. Just talking in a normal tone like somebody continuing a conversation. "I don't think this is a good idea." It took me a second to realize those were words I had said out loud earlier that morning in the station kitchen when Owen suggested powdered eggs might actually taste better if you stopped thinking of them as eggs. My blood went cold. The voice came again from farther left now. "You stop being surprised at the categories after a while." That was Owen's line. Same cadence. Same tired little humor underneath it. I turned. Owen grabbed the back of my vest so hard it nearly choked me. "Don't," he snapped. From the trees ahead, maybe 30 yards out, my own voice said, "Who's Tom Weller?" Then Harris's voice, perfectly reproduced, answered from a different direction. "A ranger." Owen was already moving, dragging me with him if necessary. We did not run outright, but only because panic and rough ground gets people killed in ordinary forests, and this place had taught us enough not to add ordinary danger to the list. We moved fast, eyes front, not speaking, until we reached the truck. Only after the doors were shut did Owen finally breathe. "You heard that before, haven't you?" I said. He nodded. "How many times?" He started the truck. Enough. There was that word again. By then I hated that word. Enough was what people said when the truth was either too large or too awful to hand over all at once. When we returned and reported what happened, Harris did something I'd never seen him do. He crossed out one of the rules on the laminated sheet by the wall. Not with hesitation. Not like he was editing. He drew one thick black line straight through it. The rule had read, "If you hear familiar voices near the western ridge, remain still until the sound passes." He replaced it by hand with a marker. "If you hear familiar voices near the western ridge, leave immediately without acknowledging them." I watched him cap the marker. "What changed?" he said. "It did." That was the moment I understood the rules weren't sacred. They weren't old wisdom. They were updates. Corrections. A living manual written by trial and error. Which meant the thing we were dealing with wasn't static. It learned. That idea sat in my chest like ice. 3 days later, Nate didn't show up for morning briefing. That had never happened. He was the most routine-bound of all of us. Same wake-up time, same coffee, same chair at the table. If anything, he was too dependable, the kind of man who looked guilty if he arrived 30 seconds late to his own life. Harris sent Owen to the cabins. Owen came back alone. "Nate's not there." We checked anyway. Cabin empty. Bed unslept in or remade so neatly it looked untouched. Boots gone. Jacket gone. Radio handset hanging off the wall bracket like it had been lifted and dropped. There were no signs of struggle. No blood. No broken furniture. Just one thing out of place. The laminated rules sheet by Nate's door had been torn down and folded on the desk. Folded to show only one line. "Do not look into the windows of cabin 2 if the curtains are closed and a light is visible inside." Cabin 2 was Nate's cabin. We all looked toward it at the same time. Curtains closed. Light on inside. Even though the room we stood in was empty. Something in my body wanted to be sick right there. Harris spoke before anybody could say the obvious. "No one goes to the window." He stepped backward out of the cabin doorway and motioned us with him. "Carla, main building. Owen, get the truck. Ethan, with me." I wanted to ask what we were doing, but I already knew. Not going to the window. Not even glancing. As we backed away across the clearing, I felt that awful pull, the one the place always used against your better judgment. The sense that if I just looked, the confusion would end. There'd be an answer. A shape. Proof. Curtains closed. Light visible inside. That rule existed because people looked. I kept my eyes on the ground until Harris and I reached the side of the main building. Only then did he say, "Stay here." He went inside and came back with a megaphone. He stood where Nate's cabin was visible without exposing any of us to the window and spoke into it. "Nate, if that is you, exit through the door and keep your hands visible." Silence. Then, from inside cabin 2, something knocked on the glass. A single tap. I felt all the small muscles in my arms and back lock at once. Harris said into the megaphone, louder, "Exit through the door." Another tap. Then 2 more in quick succession. Not random. Pattern. 3 taps. The whistle had 3 notes. The knock had 3 taps. Everything about the place seemed to like that number. Owen rolled the truck up beside us. Carla emerged from the main building carrying a flare gun and a coil of rope, which told me this was not the first protocol for this situation. Harris raised the megaphone again. "Nate, step outside." The door of cabin 2 opened inward a few inches. Nothing came out. It stayed like that long enough for me to realize how carefully the scene had been arranged. If you wanted to know what was inside, all you had to do was walk closer and look through the open doorway. Then the light inside clicked off. The door closed. And that was somehow worse. Harris made a decision fast. He told Owen to bring the truck around front. Told Carla to prep chains. Told me to stay clear and keep my eyes down if any curtain moved. "What are you doing?" I asked. He answered without looking at me. "Relocating the structure." He wasn't kidding. Within 10 minutes we had chains fixed to the front pilings of cabin 2 and the truck hauling the entire little building, skidding it sideways across the clearing while wood screamed and dirt tore up under the supports. I have never seen anything so absurd and so terrifying at the same time. Dragging a ranger cabin like a hooked fish because no one was willing to go look inside. We pulled it to the far end of the maintenance lot and turned its windows toward the treeline. Harris and Carla boarded the door shut from the outside without once stepping in front of the windows. Then Harris cut the power line to it with insulated shears. Only after that did he let anybody breathe. I said, "Nate's gone." No one answered. Then from inside the dragged cabin came one muffled knock. Just one. Owen went white. Carla stared at the ground. Harris said, "Everyone inside." We spent that day in the main building with the blinds shut and the radios low. No search party was sent. That bothered me more than anything else. Not because I thought Nate was still alive in a normal, rescuable sense. Because the absence of a search meant the others had categories for this too. Missing wasn't always missing. Sometimes it meant inaccessible. Sometimes it meant already interacting with a rule in progress. That evening Harris finally told me what had happened once before. Years ago, one of the seasonal hires had looked through the window of an occupied cabin after curfew because he saw movement inside and thought another ranger was in trouble. He never said exactly what he saw, only that afterward he kept insisting his cabin had another version of itself inside it, slightly wrong, with somebody standing in the corner waiting for him to come closer. 3 nights later he walked out into the trees during a windstorm and was never found. "So we just leave Nate?" I asked. Harris's eyes were hollow with exhaustion. "If Nate returns, he comes by the door. He does not need us to confirm him by the window." That night no one said much. Around 10 p.m. Carla sat across from me cleaning her service revolver with a steadiness that looked deliberate enough to be therapy. Owen was pretending to read a manual and not absorbing any of it. Harris was writing in the incident book. I finally asked the thing nobody wanted asked. "Has anyone ever come back right?" Nobody answered at first. Then Carla said, "Sometimes people come back useful." That was such a terrible sentence I didn't even know where to start with it. A little after midnight, there was a scraping sound along the outer wall of the building. Slow. Wood against wood. Not claws. Not branches. More like someone dragging the flat of a hand along the siding as they walked around the perimeter. Once. Then silence. Then again on another wall. Circling. We killed the lantern nearest the back hallway and waited. The scraping came to the window beside the radio desk and stopped. I realized I had stopped breathing. Then came 3 soft taps on the glass. Harris did not move. The taps came again. Then Nate's voice, quiet and tired and so painfully normal that it made the skin on my face prickle. "Leon." Harris shut his eyes once, very briefly. Nate's voice came again. "I'm cold." No one moved. From the far side of the building, another voice answered. "Mine. He's cold." And then Owen's. "Let him in." The pressure started in my head again, sharp enough this time that I had to grip the edge of the table. Carla whispered, "Lights." Owen turned on every battery lantern we had. The pressure eased immediately. Outside, the voices stopped. Then, from the maintenance lot where cabin 2 had been dragged, something hit the side of the boarded structure hard enough to make it boom across the clearing. Once. Twice. A third time. The entire station held its breath. Then from very far off beyond the trees came the whistle. 3 notes. Answered by another whistle from a different direction. Then another. The sounds traded back and forth over the clearing like signals in fog. I didn't sleep at all. By dawn, Harris had made a decision. We were evacuating the district for 48 hours. That sounded impossible. You don't just abandon a remote ranger station because of bad vibes and backward footprints. There were procedures. Assets. Fuel. Records. But Harris wasn't improvising. He radioed Central Admin with a weather excuse and a maintenance reason I knew was bullshit the moment he said it. Bridge instability, communications irregularity, temporary closure. Whatever channels existed above us, they were used to hearing partial lies. No one argued much. By 9 a.m. we had the trucks loaded with essential gear. Harris left only sealed storage and the boarded cabin behind. As we were pulling out of the clearing, I looked once toward the maintenance lot. The boards over cabin 2's door were still in place. But one of the curtains inside had shifted just enough to show a narrow black gap of window. I looked away so fast I gave myself neck pain. We drove south in convo for nearly 3 hours to a larger district post with actual roads and tourist signage and a vending machine in the lobby. I can't describe how strange ordinary people looked after living at North District. 2 visitors in fleece jackets arguing over a fishing map felt more unreal than anything in the woods. We bunked there for 2 nights. The others relaxed a little, though not much. I thought distance would help me think clearly. Instead, it made everything feel worse, because for the first time I could see how impossible it all sounded. The normal station had radios too, cabins too, maps too. The same institution. Same uniforms. Same forms on the wall. But no hidden rule sheets. No curtained windows anyone was afraid to look through. No one checking the treeline every time a door opened. On the second night there, I woke up to the sound of a radio hissing in the hallway. My room at the South Post didn't have a wall handset. Still, I heard static. Then, very softly, from somewhere just beyond the door. "North District, this is Station 4. Respond." I froze in bed. A second later there came 3 slow whistles from outside the building. Not in the woods. In the parking lot. That was when I understood something Harris had never said out loud. You could leave the district. The district didn't always leave you. When I told Harris in the morning, he only nodded. Then it noticed you. I stared at him. What does that mean? It means going back will either settle it or worsen it. That was not a sentence any sane supervisor should ever say to an employee. And still, 2 days later, I got back in the truck with them and returned to North District. Because some part of me had already been captured by the same force that builds all traps, the need to see the shape of the thing closing around you. When we reached the clearing, everything looked normal. Too normal. Station intact. Cabins in place. No signs of damage except the drag marks where Cabin 2 had been hauled to the maintenance lot. Harris made us wait in the vehicles 10 full minutes before unloading anything. Then he said, "Same rules. More attention." We began reopening the station in cautious steps. Power first. Radios second. Exterior inspection in pairs. Cabin 2 was still boarded. No sound from inside. No movement behind the shifted curtain. Harris ordered an additional tarp nailed over the window side before we did anything else. By early afternoon we were almost functioning again. That was when Owen found Nate's boot. Just one. Lying in the middle of the clearing between the station and the radio mast. Mud dried around the sole. Laces tied. Inside was a folded piece of paper. Harris unfolded it wearing gloves. It was a torn section of the laminated rule sheet. Only one line remained readable. If you see a person standing on the ridge tree line facing away from you, leave the area immediately. On the back, in shaky handwriting that looked like Nate's, were 4 words. It stands closer now. Nobody said anything for a long time after that. And somewhere in the trees beyond the ridge, too faint to locate but clear enough to hear, someone whistled 3 slow notes. I didn't realize how fast a place could train your nerves until that note showed up. It stands closer now. That was the kind of sentence that should have sent all of us packing permanently. Instead, it just became part of the day's reality, the same way storm warnings or bear sightings might in any other district. Harris burned the note in a metal tray behind the station. He didn't say why. He just lit it, watched it curl black, then crushed the ash with the end of a screwdriver until nothing legible remained. After that, he rewrote our patrol assignments. No one was to approach the western ridge alone. No one was to remain outside after dusk under any circumstances. And from that point on, every cabin check was to be done in pairs, even in daylight. He also added a new line by hand to the operations board in the radio room. If you find clothing, gear, or handwritten messages in the clearing, report them immediately, and do not assume they came from the missing person. That line bothered me almost more than the note. It meant Nate's boot might not have been Nate's boot in any simple sense. It meant the district was beginning to use objects the same way it used voices. That afternoon, Carla asked me to help her restock the trauma kits. Not because she needed the help, I think. Because she didn't want anybody by themselves with their thoughts. We sat at the big table in the station opening sterile packs, checking dates on bandages, counting tourniquets, and pretending routine still meant something. After a while I said, "Has it ever happened like this before?" She didn't ask what I meant. "Yes." "Where somebody disappears and then starts leaving signs?" She closed the hard case a little too firmly. "Once with a volunteer. Once with a surveyor. Once with a ranger before my time. And each time the signs got more convincing." That word again. Convincing. Like whatever worked in the district didn't just imitate. It improved. I asked if any of them had ever been found. She took a while to answer. "One body was found." "Only one?" She nodded. "Was it normal?" Carla stared at the med kit in front of her. "No." I wanted to ask what that meant, but there are some answers your body rejects before your mouth can form the question. I let it go. That evening, before dark, Harris had us help him secure additional tarps over cabin 2 and the maintenance lot fencing. Nobody looked directly at the windows. Nobody wanted to test whether the curtain gap had widened. It was strange how quickly avoidance became discipline. By then I had been in the district long enough that not looking was starting to feel as active as looking. Like averting your eyes was physical labor. Around sunset, the radio picked up 2 partial distress calls from hikers 20 miles south. Both false alarms, or at least ordinary alarms. A sprained ankle. A stalled ATV. Harris answered those with complete calm, and I remember being almost offended by how normal he sounded. Like he could flip back into public service ranger mode whenever needed, while the rest of us sat there watching the walls as if they might start talking. After dinner, Owen finally said out loud what all of us had been circling around. "If Nate's trying to warn us about what?" No one answered immediately. Then Harris said, "Not us specifically." Owen frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means warnings can be invitations if you read them the wrong way." That was one of the most frustrating things about Harris. He talked like somebody who had survived by becoming difficult to understand on purpose. Maybe that was the point. Maybe plain language made things too easy for whatever listened. We bedded down again in the main building. Lanterns on. Windows covered. Radios low. At 11:40 p.m., there was a sound from the roof. Not footsteps this time. Dragging. Heavy, slow, irregular. Something moving across the metal sheeting above the office as if it didn't mind the height or the noise. Owen whispered, "Please keep going." The sound stopped directly overhead. Then silence. Then 3 knocks from above us. The whole room tensed. 3 more knocks. Then, very softly, from the roof, a woman's voice said, "I found your brother. I don't have a sister." For one disorienting second, I thought the sentence had saved me, because it wasn't using someone I loved. Then I realized what it was doing instead. Testing. Trying a different angle. The voice changed. My mother's voice. "Ethan." Then my brother's. "You gonna leave me out here?" I dug my nails into my palms until they hurt. No one moved. The roof made a creaking sound like weight shifting from one side of the station to the other. Then came another noise. Not from above. From the hallway leading to the storage room. A soft metallic clink. Then another. I turned, and even in the dim lantern light I could see Carla go rigid. The sound came again. Like something lightly tapping the chain on the supply cage door. Harris stood. "Lantern," he said. Owen grabbed another battery lantern and turned it on, aiming the light down the hall without stepping into it. The sound stopped instantly. We watched the hallway for the next minute without speaking. Nothing moved. Nothing appeared. Still, the pressure in my head rose again, enough to make me feel slightly detached from my own balance. Carla noticed. "So did mine before the floodplain trip," she said quietly. I looked at her. "Before what trip?" Her expression changed. Just for a second. A mistake, maybe? Something she hadn't meant to say. Harris looked up sharply, but he was too late. I had heard it. "Floodplain trip?" Carla pressed her lips together. I said, "What floodplain trip?" No one answered. Then, from the radio, a burst of static hit so suddenly that we all flinched. A male voice came through, clipped and strained. "North side, don't use the bridge." Not Station 4. Not any voice I recognized. Just some man talking through interference with the breathless urgency of somebody in mid-emergency. Harris crossed the room and turned the volume slightly higher. The voice crackled again. If it's on the ridge, keep your eyes down. Then more static. Then, clear as day, Nate's voice. Leon, it learned the door. The radio went dead. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Finally I looked at Harris and said, What did he mean? His face had gone pale in a way I hadn't seen before. Then he did something that scared me more than the transmission itself. He unlocked the cabinet and took out a ring binder I had never seen before. No label. No park stamp. Just a thick weatherproof binder with handwritten tabs. He opened it to a page near the middle and began reading silently. What is that? I asked. Old protocols. For what? He didn't answer. Instead, he flipped another page, read, then another. Finally, he said, Nobody uses exterior doors alone anymore. New rule. Owen swore under his breath. I said, You had a binder of this the whole time? Harris looked at me. The laminated rules are for surviving the usual pattern. This is for when the pattern shifts. And you didn't think I should know that before now? No, he said flatly. Because knowing too much too early makes people interpret things they should ignore. I wanted to argue, but a part of me already knew he was right. The more I learned, the more every sound, every shadow, every odd pause in the woods began to feel like a message. The district didn't need full understanding to work on you. Partial understanding was enough. That night nothing else happened. Which was almost worse. By dawn, all of us were brittle with lack of sleep, and the ordinary chores of the station felt absurd. Coffee. Fuel checks. Weather log. Trail closure sign updates. I found myself thinking about normal life with a kind of grief I hadn't expected. Grocery stores. Traffic lights. Apartment hallways. The stupid warehouse job I had complained about in Spokane. I would have traded a month in that fluorescent misery for one night of not wondering whether my own voice might start talking from the treeline. The next serious event came just after noon. A floatplane landed upriver with a fisheries biologist and a pilot making an unscheduled stop because of engine trouble. It was the first time in days outsiders had entered our orbit, and I realized with sudden relief how much I wanted them there. Real people from outside the pattern. Proof the world was still normal somewhere. The biologist's name was Melissa. Early 40s, practical, no nonsense, the kind of person who immediately feels more competent than you in any wilderness setting. The pilot, Darren, stayed with the plane while Harris and Owen helped assess the engine issue. Melissa came into the station to warm up and fill out temporary landing paperwork. She glanced around at the covered windows and the tired faces and said, You people look like you've had a week. Nobody laughed. She poured herself coffee and looked at the operations board. What's this one? She asked, pointing to the newest line Harris had written. If you hear your own voice in the woods, leave the area immediately. Carla said too quickly. Old joke. Melissa raised an eyebrow. The radio clicked. Every ranger in the room froze. Melissa noticed. She looked from one of us to the other. Okay. What's going on here? Before anyone could answer, a voice came through the speaker. North District, this is Fisheries 2. Darren, you read me? Melissa frowned. That's our call sign. The voice continued. We've got a visual on station personnel from the East Bank. Need someone to confirm. Harris crossed to the radio but did not touch the handset. Melissa said. That's Darren. The voice on the radio was good. Very good. Calm, exact, same slight nasal edge the real Darren had when he spoke from outside earlier. If I hadn't heard all the other imitations, I would have believed it. The radio crackled again. Melissa, if you're inside, tell them we've got a man standing behind the fuel shed. Every muscle in the room tightened. Melissa turned automatically toward the covered window beside the supply shelves. Carla caught her wrist before she reached it. Don't. Melissa pulled back sharply. What the hell? Harris spoke without taking his eyes off the radio. How long have you been partnered with Darren? Melissa blinked. What? The voice answered before she could. 6 years. Melissa's face changed. 3, she whispered. Nobody in the room breathed. The radio remained silent for 2 beats. Then the same voice came back, almost amused now. My mistake. The transmission cut off. Melissa looked at us one by one, searching our faces for the version of reality she preferred. No one gave it to her. Finally she said, What is this place? And there was no longer any cover story left to hand her. Harris only said, A district with rules. That should have sent her running straight back to the plane. Instead, like most decent people confronted with weirdness and danger in the same room, she got stubborn. She wanted explanations. Wanted to know whether somebody was targeting aircraft traffic. Wanted to know if we had a trespasser problem, or a cult problem, or some kind of long-running hazing nonsense. All the explanations a rational person reaches for when the irrational first presses against them. Harris gave her none. He just said she and Darren needed to leave before dark, engine or no engine. That turned the whole afternoon into a rush. Owen and Darren worked on the floatplane while Harris and Carla made repeated visual sweeps of the clearing without ever exposing themselves to the covered window angles. Melissa hovered near the station, trying to help and trying not to show she was unnerved. At one point she pulled me aside while Carla was checking fuel cans. Are you people serious about those rules? I said yes. She studied my face and must have found what she was looking for there, because her tone changed. What happened here? I could have lied. I could have given her the same official half-truths everybody had been giving me. Instead I said, Do not answer any radio call unless you can see Darren making it. If someone calls your name from the trees, ignore it. If you see anyone standing outside who doesn't look right, go inside and get Harris. Melissa stared at me. That's not an explanation. No, I said. It's the useful part. They got the plane running just before dusk. The engine sounded rough but viable. Darren taxied it into position while Melissa gathered her gear. She paused before boarding and looked back toward the station. Then she frowned. What's that? Every one of us followed her gaze toward the far edge of the clearing. At first I saw nothing. Then I saw what she meant. A person standing near the radio mast. Tall. Dark clothes. Facing away. Too far to identify. Too still to be casual. Melissa took one step forward like she meant to wave or call out. Carla grabbed her shoulder hard. Do not! Melissa looked at her, alarmed now. Is that one of yours? No, Harris said. The figure by the mast lifted one arm and beckoned without turning around. Exactly the motion Owen and I had seen in the road. Once. Twice. Darren shouted from the plane, asking if she was coming. The figure remained motionless except for the raised arm. Melissa looked between us and it, trying to solve the scene like a puzzle with one missing piece. Then the figure took a single step backward. Toward us. Still facing away. That was enough. Melissa got in the plane. Darren pushed the engine harder than he probably should have, and the float plane tore down the channel and lifted off in a spray of cold gray water. We watched it climb over the trees and vanish south. Only then did I look back toward the radio mast. The figure was gone. No sound. No movement. Just empty clearing. That night Harris updated the temporary closure with language strong enough that it would keep almost everyone out. Wildlife management issue. Patrol restrictions. Hazardous conditions. It wasn't enough for me anymore. I wanted out completely. After dinner I told Harris I was done. Not at the end of the season. No. I'll wait for the next supply flight, and I'm gone. He nodded once like he had expected this sooner. Understood. That should have been the end of it. But then he said, "You should know it may not stop immediately." I stared at him. What does that mean? It means some people leave the district before the district is done with them. I laughed once, sharp and humorless. That sounds like something you say so people don't quit. He didn't react. Maybe. Or maybe I'm telling you what to expect. That night I dreamed of Cabin 2. In the dream, I was standing in the clearing looking at it from the maintenance lot. The tarp over the windows was gone. The curtains were shut, but a warm yellow light glowed behind them, soft and domestic, like somebody was making coffee inside. I knew in the dream exactly what the rule was. Do not look into the windows of Cabin 2 if the curtains are closed and a light is visible inside. But I also knew, with dream certainty, that my brother was in there. Not trapped. Waiting. He kept calling my name from behind the curtain in a normal, annoyed tone, like I was making him late for something stupid. I walked toward the cabin. Every step made the clearing longer instead of shorter. The cabin stayed the same distance away while the ground stretched beneath me like a treadmill. Then the curtain at the nearest window moved a fraction. Not opening. Just enough to show a sliver of darkness between fabric and frame. From that darkness, my own eye looked back at me. I woke up biting my tongue hard enough to taste blood. The next morning there were handprints on the outside wall of the station. Not many. 5 or 6. They appeared on the siding between the office window and the back door, high enough that an ordinary man would have had to reach awkwardly to place them. The prints weren't muddy. They looked almost chalky, pale gray, as if made with river silt or ash. Each one had fingers too long by just enough to disturb you. Not monstrous. Not obviously impossible. Just wrong. Owen saw them first and called us over. Harris looked at them, then at the tree line, then said, "Wash them now." Carla and I scrubbed them off with buckets and stiff brushes while he stood watch. The whole time I had the sensation of being observed from multiple angles, not dramatic enough to locate, just constant enough to fray my nerves. As we worked, Carla said quietly, "You still planning to leave?" "Yes." "Good." I looked at her. That sounded sincere. It was. She kept scrubbing. "I stayed too long the first time," she added. I stopped brushing. "The first time?" She didn't meet my eyes. "I left this district years ago. Took another posting near Talkeetna. Lasted 11 months before I started hearing whistling outside my apartment." A chill moved through me. "You came back?" "It was worse away from the rules." That sentence hit harder than almost anything else I'd heard there. Not because it was the scariest. Because it was practical. The rules weren't just restrictions. They were a framework, maybe the only framework, for dealing with whatever attached itself to certain people once they'd been seen properly by the district. That day we got word the next supply flight would arrive in 2 days if weather held. I held on to that like a rope. 2 days. Just 2 more nights. The first of those nights went almost quietly. Almost. At 1:12 a.m., the radio crackled once and emitted a few seconds of what sounded like distant breathing. At 1:47, something walked across the gravel outside the front door slowly enough that each step could be counted. At 2:03, the pressure in my head rose and then vanished so abruptly it left me slightly nauseous. No voices. No knocks. No whistles. Which meant none of us slept. The second day was cold and windless, one of those blue-sky northern days that feel too sharp around the edges. Harris sent Owen and me to check the floodplain markers near the old cabin zone, likely because he didn't want anyone alone but also didn't want to leave all the fieldwork undone. I did not want to go. Every instinct in me resisted heading back toward the abandoned structures. But work is one of the strange comforts people cling to when fear becomes routine. Checklist, radio, map, truck, task. The shape of ordinary behavior becomes a shield even when it isn't one. We reached the floodplain boundary around noon. The markers themselves were intact. The land beyond them looked flat and harmless under the clean sky, which somehow made it worse. Places like that always seemed most dangerous when they looked empty enough to forgive. Owen was tightening a loose reflector plate when I noticed something out near the old standing cabin. Movement. Subtle. At first I thought it was heat shimmer or wind in the brush. Then I realized a strip of fabric was hanging from the rear corner of the cabin. Dark green. I knew that color. Nate's jacket. It had been tied around the carved mark on the wall like a marker flag. Owen. He looked up, followed my stare, and went pale. We were too far to see details clearly, but close enough to know it hadn't been there the last time. His first instinct matched mine. Get it. Proof. Sign. Evidence Nate had been there. Then he whispered, "No." Almost to himself. I said, "It's his jacket." "I know." "Then maybe he—" "No." This time harder. He stood up and backed away from the marker post. "It wants a path." The phrase made no sense in the moment, but I obeyed the fear in his face and stepped back too. That was when the cabin door opened. Not all the way. Just inward a few inches. Exactly as cabin 2's door had opened. No one came out. No voice called. It just opened enough to create possibility. Owen grabbed my sleeve and pulled me toward the truck. We had only taken maybe 10 steps when a man's voice floated out from the cabin, thinned by distance but unmistakably human. "Wrong side." We both froze. The voice came again. "You left me on the wrong side, Nate." Or something very close. Every decent impulse in my body twisted at once. Owen shook his head violently, not at me, at the woods, at the whole scene. Then a second voice came from inside the cabin. My own. "He's still alive!" That broke whatever was left of our hesitation. We got in the truck and left so fast we fishtailed in mud at the turn. Back at the station, Harris listened without interruption, then opened the binder of old protocols again. He scanned a few pages and said, "No more floodplain checks. Effective immediately." I almost laughed. "Effective immediately? You think?" He ignored the tone. Then he said something none of us wanted to hear. "If the supply plane doesn't make it tomorrow, We moved to full lockdown. Nobody asked what that meant. We all knew it would be bad. That night the whistles began before midnight. Not one. Not two. At least four, from different distances around the clearing. 3 notes each. Never overlapping fully. Like a pattern being assembled from multiple points. Harris had all lanterns lit, every door secured, radios turned low but not off. At 12:26 a.m., something brushed the west wall with a sound like fabric dragging over wood. At 12:31, the back doorknob rattled once. At 12:44, the roof creaked under weight. At 12:51, Cabin 2's boarded door started banging somewhere out in the maintenance lot. Not frantic. Measured. 3 impacts. Pause. 3 impacts. Pause. And then, for the first time since I had arrived in Alaska, Harris looked genuinely unsure. Only for a moment. But I saw it. He went to the office, came back with a flare gun and a canvas bag I had never seen before, and placed both on the table. "What is that?" Carla asked. "Last resort," Owen said. "For what?" Harris answered without expression. "If it gets in the building." That silence that followed felt like another object in the room. Then the radio came alive. Not a single voice this time. Many. Overlapping, cutting through each other, each one only clear for a second before another replaced it. A woman crying. A child laughing. My brother asking where I'd gone. Nate saying open the south door. Carla shouting no from somewhere she was not. Then, above the rest, loud and calm and unmistakable, Superintendent Harris's own voice saying, "I am outside." Every actual person in the room looked at Harris. He stood beside the table, hand on the flare gun. The radio voice repeated, "I am outside. Do not trust the one inside." The pressure hit my skull so hard that black dots flickered at the edges of my vision. Owen doubled over, palms on knees. Carla sat down abruptly like her legs had misfired. Harris raised his voice over the radio noise. "Eyes on me. Nobody else. Eyes on me." We obeyed. Not because he was an authority figure by then. Because having a real face to look at felt like survival. The station lights flickered once. We had been on battery only. They should not have flickered. Then came 3 knocks on the front door. And immediately after 3 knocks from inside the office door. Then 3 from the storage room wall. Then 3 from the ceiling. Answering each other. Like the entire building had become a signaling device. The front door knocks came again, and Nate's voice called from outside. "Leon, it's in here with you." Something crashed in the maintenance lot. Wood splitting. Cabin 2. I knew it before anyone said it. The boarded door had finally given way, or the wall had. Owen whispered, "Oh God." Harris opened the canvas bag. Inside were road flares, iron nails, a coil of thin chain, and what looked like strips of paper covered in handwriting. Not symbols. Not occult drawings. Just handwritten lines repeated over and over. Rules. Copied rules. Carla stared at them. "You kept those?" Harris said. "Only if the boundaries fail." He handed us each a flare. "Do not light unless I say." The banging in the maintenance lot stopped. Silence spread outward over the clearing like something listening. Then from very close to the station wall beside me came a single scrape. Like a fingernail moving slowly down the siding. And a voice just beyond it, so soft I almost thought I imagined it. "Mine," it whispered. I know which one you are now. The doorknob on the west entrance began to turn. Not rattle. Not twitch. Turn. Slowly, steadily, like somebody on the other side understood exactly how locks worked and had all the time in the world to test them. Harris didn't move at first. He watched the handle make one full downward press, release, then another. His face had gone flat in the way people's faces do when fear becomes too expensive to show. Then he said very quietly, "Lanterns to the floor." We lowered every lantern we could without extinguishing them, setting them on the planks so the room filled with low yellow light and deeper shadows above waist level. The knob turned again. From outside came a soft knock. 3 taps. Then my own voice, calm and close enough that I could picture my mouth making the shape of the words, said, "You should let me in before it starts." That almost made me speak. Not because I believed it was me. Because I wanted to ask one question so badly that it burned. What starts? Harris must have seen something in my face because he said my name without looking at me. "Don't get curious now." The handle stopped moving. Silence. Then, from the roof directly above us, something hit the metal hard enough to make Owen flinch backward into the wall. A heavy, wet thud. Then another. Then dragging. Whatever was on the roof moved across it with a kind of deliberate weight, not crawling, not walking exactly, more like shifting from point to point in a pattern it already knew. The radio was still hissing voices under the static, but lower now, as if farther away. The thing on the roof reached the far side of the building and stopped. From outside the front door, Nate's voice said, "It learned the door because of me." No one answered. A second voice, female this time, came from just beyond the same door. "Melissa. The fisheries biologist. You need to let me in." That should have been impossible. She was hours away by plane. The voice continued, sounding strained, cold, and furious all at once. Darren crashed. "I'm hurt." Carla shut her eyes for a second, then opened them. That was the first real crack I'd seen in her. The front step creaked. 1 foot. Then another. Then stillness again. The pressure in my skull was back so badly by then that the room felt subtly tilted, as if all the furniture had shifted a few degrees and only my body noticed. My ears rang. My hands had started to tingle. Harris pulled one of the handwritten paper strips from the canvas bag and nailed it to the frame beside the west entrance with 3 fast hammer strikes. The sound of the hammer seemed to change the air. Not metaphorically. Actually change it. The ringing in my ears dipped for a second. The pressure eased just enough to let me take a full breath. Outside, the porch creaked once more, then nothing. Owen stared at the paper strip. "What is that?" Harris didn't look away from the door. "Old field measure." "For what?" "For keeping one thing. That sentence made no sense, but it didn't have to. By then I understood enough to know Harris was no longer protecting us from confusion. He was trying to keep the building from becoming part of whatever game was being played outside. Carla took 2 more strips from the bag and moved toward the back hall. Harris caught her wrist. "Not alone." I went with her. Neither of us said anything as we crossed into the hallway. The air there felt colder immediately, like stepping into a church basement in winter. We nailed 1 strip above the storage room door and 1 above the office. When I lifted the hammer for the last nail above the office frame, something knocked softly from the other side. 3 taps. Close enough that my breath caught. Carla whispered, "Do it." I drove the nail through. The knocking stopped. When we returned to the main room, the voices in the radio had faded to static again. Then the west wall made a long creaking sound. Not from the building settling. From pressure. Something leaning against it from outside. A lot of something. The boards flexed inward a hair, then released. Owen whispered, "How many are out there?" Harris answered in the same tone, "Don't count." That was another thing the district did. It trained you not just in action, but in what kinds of thought were dangerous. Don't answer. Don't look. Don't count. Don't confirm. Don't let your own mind become a door. The west wall creaked again. Then from somewhere far off in the trees came one whistle. 3 slow notes. It was answered almost immediately from the maintenance lot. Then from the river. Then the ridge. The sound moved around the clearing in an expanding pattern until it no longer felt like separate whistles. It felt like the district itself breathing through hollow spaces. And then everything stopped. No roof noise. No voices. No doorknob. No whistle. Just stillness so complete that I could hear the lantern flames ticking faintly inside their glass. Harris looked at the clock. 1:33 a.m. He didn't explain why he was watching the time so closely, but I noticed it. 1:34. 1:35. At 1:36 the radio clicked. A clear tone this time. Then a man's voice, completely unfamiliar, came through. "If you can hear this, do not let it keep you until second light." The transmission broke into static. Harris stepped forward as if the words had pulled him by the chest. The voice returned. "I repeat, do not let it keep you until second light." "Who is this?" Harris said before he could stop himself. The entire room froze. He had answered. "Not Station 4, not exactly, but something." The radio exploded with static so loud it drowned everything else. Every lantern flame shook. The pressure in my skull became sharp pain. Then the front windows boomed inward like several bodies had hit the shutters at once. The west door handle slammed up and down. The office door started knocking from inside, no longer patient. Fast now. Hard. 3 knocks became 6, then 9, then an unbroken battering that made the frame shiver. Carla shouted over the noise. "Leon! I know!" Harris grabbed a road flare, struck it, and the room filled with violent red light and white smoke. Outside, all sound stopped at once. Not lessened. Stopped. The radio cut dead. The knocking ceased. The doorknob froze halfway down. For one awful second the flare seemed to light the entire station from the inside out. Every shadow sharpened, every surface looked raw, and in the red wash reflected faintly on the covered front window I thought I saw outlines moving just beyond the boards. Not people. Arrangements. Tall, narrow shapes standing too close together. The flare spat and hissed. The silence held. Then, from directly above the center of the room, a child's voice said through the roof, "Second light already happened for us." No one moved. The voice giggled. Then something ran across the roof from one end to the other so fast the metal screamed under it. Owen made a sound I had never heard from an adult man before, part panic, part pure disbelief. Harris lit a second flare and thrust it into Carla's hand. "Back room," he said. "If the windows go, we burn the threshold." My stomach dropped. Burn the threshold. Not defend the room. Not shoot through the door. Burn the threshold. I realized then the flare wasn't just light. It was barrier. Maybe temporary. Maybe imperfect. but important enough that Harris was rationing them like air. The first flare burned down to half its length. The room stayed still. Then from outside the west wall came my brother's voice, so normal and annoyed and alive that my eyes filled before I could stop them. "Ethan, open the door!" I clenched my jaw. A pause. Then, quieter. "I know you know it's me." That sentence was so cruelly well made that it nearly broke me. Not because it sounded true. Because it understood where doubt lived. "Beside me," Carla said without looking at me. "It always gets close to right before it gets ugly." Outside, my brother's voice laughed softly. Then it said in my own voice, "She knows." The west wall slammed inward again, harder. Something cracked in the frame. Harris looked at the clock. 1:52. Whatever second light meant, we were not there yet. The next 10 minutes felt longer than most years of my life. The pressure in the room rose and fell in waves. The radio clicked on twice with no voice. The roof made soft traveling sounds as if weight was shifting from corner to corner. The front shutters bowed inward once and held. The office door rattled so hard on one hinge that Owen had to brace it with a chair. At 1:58, the maintenance lot erupted with a splintering crash. Cabin 2. A second crash followed immediately, then dragging wood, then silence. Harris swore under his breath. That alone frightened me. I had never heard him swear. At 2:01 came a new sound. Footsteps. Inside. Not from the room with us. From the office. One slow step. Then another. I stared at the nailed strip above the office door as if I could will it to stay meaningful. The footsteps stopped directly on the other side of the wood. Then my own voice spoke from within the office, so close it might have been leaning with its mouth against the panel. "You answered something you shouldn't." No one replied. The voice continued, still mine, still calm. "That means it gets a room now." Harris lit the third flare. He did not hesitate. He thrust the burning red torch against the base of the office threshold, and held it there until the old dry wood blackened and began to catch. Smoke billowed instantly. Carla grabbed the water extinguisher, ready, not to put it out, I realized, but to keep it from spreading where it shouldn't. From inside the office came a sound like several voices inhaling at once. Then the footsteps backed away. The pressure in the room dropped so suddenly I nearly collapsed from relief. Harris stamped the flames down with a wet rag before they could spread beyond the frame. "There," he said, more to himself than to us. The clock read 2:07. Then something knocked on the front door. Once. Not 3 times. Once. A different rhythm. A different intention. No one moved. A woman's voice came from outside. Not Melissa. Not Carla. Not my mother. A voice I had never heard. Old. Tired. Flat with cold. "Open if you want him back." My skin went numb. "Nate." It had shifted again. Harris did not take the bait. Neither did anyone else. The voice remained at the door. "I only brought part of him." Then footsteps moved off the porch. Something small hit the boards outside with a wet slap. I gagged before I could help it. No one checked. No one looked. We stayed exactly where we were, inside that awful yellow and red light, waiting for a version of morning none of us fully believed in anymore. Sometime after 2:30, maybe closer to 3 o'clock, the pressure began to ease. The roof sound stopped. The doorknob never moved again. The radio stayed dead. At 3:12, The first gray hint of pre-dawn made the cracks around the shutterboards look less black. Harris watched the change with an intensity that bordered on prayer. At 3:28, birds started. Not many. A few. Thin, uncertain chirps from the tree-ling. I had never heard anything so beautiful. Wait, Harris said immediately, as if reading my relief. Not yet. At 3:41, the eastern sky brightened enough that the room changed shape. Lantern light no longer dominated. Corners became ordinary corners again. The boards over the windows looked like boards, not lids over something thinking. Then, exactly at 3:47, somewhere beyond the ridge a second wave of birdsong began. Different from the first. Fuller. Closer. Harris exhaled. Second light, he said. No one cheered. No one relaxed fully. But the room came back to us a little. It took another 40 minutes before he allowed the doors opened, and only then in teams with flares ready and rifles slung. What we found outside was worse than damage because it was evidence. The front porch had 3 long gray smears across the planks, as if something wet had been dragged there and lifted away. The shutters bore hand-shaped prints in pale silt. The maintenance lot looked like a storm had hit it alone. Cabin 2's outer boards had been torn away from one side, not splintered outward but peeled back. The tarp over the windows hung in ribbons. And on the front step of the station lay something wrapped in a strip of Nate's green jacket. Harris knelt by it in gloves. He unwrapped the cloth and went still. I only saw it for a second before he covered it again. A hand? Human. Severed above the wrist. Not old. Not rotten. Not animal chewed. The fingers were curled around a folded piece of lined paper. Owen turned away and vomited into the gravel. Carla sat down hard on the porch step like her knees had gone. I stood there staring at the wrapped bundle, not really understanding I was looking at a human hand until my body suddenly understood on its own and a cold wave rolled from my chest to my legs. Harris unfolded the paper. It contained 2 lines in Nate's handwriting. I opened the wrong door. Do not let it learn yours. Nobody spoke for a long time. Then Harris stood and said, in a voice so flat it almost disappeared, "We are leaving today." No discussion. No waiting for supplies. No checking weather. He marched inside, got on the satellite line, and started using language I had never heard from him. Direct, angry, uncompromising. Emergency extraction. Full district closure. Immediate personnel relocation. Whatever strings existed above him, he pulled every one. A helicopter from state support couldn't get in until late afternoon, but that was good enough. We were done with North District. There was only one problem. We still had to survive until it arrived. The hours between that decision and the helicopter landing were some of the longest of the entire experience because the district understood change. You could feel it. The station no longer felt like a workplace. It felt like a place being abandoned by people who knew it had noticed them. We packed essentials only. Incident binders, weapons, radios, personal bags, fuel manifests. Harris burned everything else that looked handwritten or unofficial. The copied rule strips. Spare notes. Old scraps from drawers. He did it methodically behind the station in a metal drum while Carla and Owen boarded the office threshold more heavily than before. At noon, while we loaded crates near the helipad clearing, I saw movement at the ridge. A figure. Tall, dark, facing away. Closer than any I had seen before. Not far up the slope. At the actual tree line overlooking the station. I froze. It lifted one arm and beckoned. Once. Twice. Then another figure appeared 10 yards to its right. Then a third. All facing away. All still. I looked down immediately and shouted for Harris. He didn't ask what I saw. He only asked one question. How many? I said 3. He swore. Then he did something that made me understand the situation more clearly than any explanation ever had. He ordered us to stop loading and move everything under cover. Not because of weather. Because 3 was escalation. The figures stayed on the ridge for almost an hour. We did not look again. We worked with our eyes low and our hands shaking. At 1:20, the radio on the desk emitted a single burst of static, and then Harris's own voice said, "They came over the ridge before once." That voice did not come from the real Harris. He was outside with me carrying crates. We all stopped anyway. No one responded. The radio repeated, "They came over the ridge before once." And then, more softly, "Don't make us do that again." Owen unplugged the unit entirely. At 2:05, we heard the helicopter before we saw it. It was the best sound I have ever heard in my life. Rotors far off, then closer, cutting across the valley from the south. The machine came into view over the trees, banking hard, and settled toward the makeshift landing area with enough wind wash to tear loose paper and whip dust into our faces. The pilot kept the engine hot. That scared me almost as much as anything else. He had been warned enough not to plan a leisurely stop. We moved fast, loading bags and locked cases while the medic on board shouted for urgency over the rotors. As I carried my duffel across the clearing, I made the mistake of glancing toward the ridge. The figures were gone. For 1 second relief hit me. Then I realized what their absence meant. They were no longer waiting visibly. I broke into a run. We got Carla aboard first, then Owen, then the cases. Harris shoved the wrapped bundle containing Nate's hand into a hard cooler and loaded it last. He turned once toward the station, scanning windows, doors, roof, tree line, maintenance lot, everything. Then he climbed in. I was the final one on. The helicopter rose before the side door was fully secured, banking hard over the river and lifting south. I looked down through the open gap just once. The station shrank below us, clearing and roofs and the bright cut of water all going small. And in the center of the helipad clearing, exactly where the helicopter had been sitting moments before, stood one tall figure facing away. It had not been there during loading. It had not crossed the open ground while any of us were watching. It was simply there now, with one arm lifted in that same invitation. As the helicopter climbed, the figure bent its elbow and made a small come here motion toward the departing aircraft. The pilot saw it too. I know he did because the helicopter lurched so violently that the medic slammed a hand against the ceiling and swore. We did not circle back. No one said a word about what we had seen until we landed at the larger South Operations Base. By then the sky had gone overcast and the whole world looked flatter, less real. Officials met us on the pad. Questions. Medical assessment. Incident forms. Secure room. We gave statements separately. Mine sounded insane even as I said it. Voices, rules, figures, a severed hand in a jacket sleeve. No one laughed. No one accused me of panic. That was almost worse. It meant the people above Harris had categories too. I was put up for 2 nights in staff housing at the South Base before being flown to Anchorage. During those 2 nights nothing happened. No whistling. No pressure. No radio static. I started to believe maybe distance and daylight and ordinary buildings had broken the pattern. Then, on the morning of my departure, I was in the housing bathroom brushing my teeth when somebody knocked on the door to my unit. 3 taps. I froze. Staff housing doors all opened into a shared hallway. Morning voices carried. Footsteps, rolling luggage, somebody laughing at a vending machine that ate coins. Normal place. Normal time. The knock came again. 3 taps. I spit out the toothpaste, wiped my mouth, and went to the door. Not out of stupidity. Out of habit. Then I saw the note Harris had slipped into my duffel before we left, the only personal thing he had given me. Some rules travel. It was lying on the desk beside the door where I had left it unfolded. 3 taps. I stood there staring at the note until the knocking stopped. When I finally checked through the peephole, the hallway was empty. At the airport in Anchorage, I found Harris waiting by my gate. He looked worse than I had ever seen him. Older by years, somehow. He sat beside me without greeting, handed me an envelope, and said, "Read that when you get home." I asked what was in it. "Condensed rules," he said. For after. For after. Not if. After. I wanted to ask what would happen to North District. Whether it would reopen. Whether anybody would go back. Whether Nate was really dead or something had simply learned too much of him to stop using his name. Instead, I asked the only question that felt urgent. "Does it stop?" Harris looked at the terminal windows for a long time before answering. "Usually it gets quieter." Usually. That was all he gave me. I flew to Seattle, got my stored things, and rented a cheap apartment outside Spokane again because it was all I could manage quickly. I told my mother the job had ended early due to an injury fatality and communications problems. That part, at least, wasn't false. The first week back was almost peaceful. Traffic. Sirens far away. Neighbors with televisions too loud. The ugly comfort of everyday life. I slept with a lamp on for the first few nights and kept Harris's envelope in the kitchen drawer unopened because I was tired of rules. Tired of feeling like paper could stand between me and whatever had taken shape in Alaska. Then, on the 8th night, I woke at 1:14 a.m. to the sound of whistling outside my apartment window. 3 slow notes. I lay there with every muscle locked, staring at the dark ceiling. The whistle came again. Not loud. Not dramatic. Patient. I got out of bed, walked to the kitchen, and opened the envelope. Inside was a single folded sheet in Harris's handwriting. No greeting. No explanation. Just rules. If you hear whistling outside after midnight, do not check the window. If a voice you know calls from the hall, verify by phone before opening. Do not answer unknown transmissions between 12 a.m. and 3 a.m. If you dream of the cabin, do not return to the place in the dream. If you notice handprints on exterior walls, remove them before sunset. If you see a figure standing where it should be impossible for one to stand, leave without acknowledging it. If your own voice speaks from an empty room, turn on all available lights and do not reply. If knocking comes in sets of 3, wait for morning. Do not tell people the full pattern unless they have already heard it. If the pressure begins again, leave interior doors open except one. Never let it make you choose a conversation. If it offers the missing back to you, refuse. If it starts using your memories instead of your voice, burn this sheet and call me. There was a phone number at the bottom. No name. No sign-off. Just the number. I stood in my kitchen reading that page while the whistling moved slowly from the window to somewhere farther out in the parking lot. Then silence. That should have been enough to get me to leave spoken forever. I stayed 6 months. In those 6 months, the pattern did not vanish. It thinned. Sometimes weeks passed with nothing. Then I would hear footsteps stop outside my apartment door at 2 a.m. Or my dead neighbor's cat, which had been put down years earlier according to the lady downstairs, would scratch once at the back stairwell. Or I'd wake from dreams of cabin 2 with the exact sensation that I had almost looked through the curtain gap and ruined something permanent by not fully waking in time. I called Harris 3 times in that period. The first time because I found pale handprints on the outside brick near my bedroom window. He told me to scrub them off before dark and not use bleach. The second time because my own voice said my name from the bathroom while I was shaving. He told me to turn on every light and leave the apartment for an hour, but not before opening every interior door except the bathroom door. The third time because I was thinking about going back to Alaska. Not to North District. Just Alaska. Something in me wanted proximity again, and that terrified me. Harris listened for a long time and then said, "That's how some of it calls." I never went. About a year after the extraction, I got a plain envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a photocopy of an official closure notice. North District had been permanently suspended for public access following infrastructure failure and environmental hazard concerns. Administrative language. Clean and useless. Attached was one smaller note in handwriting I recognized as Carla's. Leon died in March. Stroke. He said if you were still having nights, tell you this, the rules work better than courage. No other message. No signature. I sat with that for a long time. The rules work better than courage. That might be the truest thing anyone ever said about that place. Because courage is what almost killed everybody out there. The desire to help. The desire to confirm. The desire to answer. The desire to look. Those are all brave instincts in the right world. North District was not the right world. Years passed. Enough that I got older in the face. Enough that my mother stopped asking whether I'd ever go back into park service. Enough that I learned how to live with certain habits without explaining them to anyone. I keep all hallway doors lit after midnight. I do not answer apartment buzzers unless I'm expecting someone. I do not talk to voices through wood. I leave one interior door closed each night and vary which one. I remove marks from walls the day I see them. I never, ever respond to my own voice. Most of the time it's quiet now. Usually quiet. Sometimes a whole season goes by and I almost convince myself the district was a kind of wound that finally scarred over. Then a winter night comes where the power in the neighborhood blinks out, and I feel the old pressure in my skull before the emergency lights in the hallway turn on. Or I hear 3 knocks from the apartment across from mine even though it's been vacant for 2 months. Or I pass a dark office building downtown after midnight and see, in one high reflective pane, what looks like a figure standing on the roof facing away. It always gets quieter. It never becomes nothing. The last time anything significant happened was 8 months ago. I live outside Boise now. Different state, different job, smaller apartment complex, fewer trees. I chose the place partly because the parking lot is wide open and there's nothing like a ridge or river anywhere near it. One night in early November, I was taking out the trash around 10:30. Too early for any of the rules to matter much, I told myself. As I crossed the lot, I noticed a man standing beyond the dumpster enclosure near the chain-link fence. Tall. Dark jacket. Facing away. My body stopped before my mind did. He was standing in a place that made no sense. Not because it was impossible. Because there was no reason for anyone to be standing there in the dark facing the fence. I didn't look long. I dropped the trash bag right where I was and walked back toward my building without hurrying. About halfway there, a voice behind me said, in Leon Harris's exact tone, "Better." I kept walking. I did not turn around. When I got to my apartment, there was an envelope on the floor just inside the door. No stamp. No address. It had either been slipped under while I was outside or had been waiting there unnoticed, which should have been impossible. Inside was a photograph. Faded. Water-warped. 4 men standing beside the Old South substation. The same photo I had found in the shed at North District. Only this copy showed more of the image along the right edge. Enough to reveal someone standing half-hidden in the trees behind the men. Tall. Still. Facing away. On the back of the photo, in fresh handwriting, were 7 words. "You stayed long enough to see us." I burned the photograph in the sink and sat on the kitchen floor until morning with every light on. That's why I'm sending this now. Not because I think telling the story fixes anything. Not because I think somebody out there has the perfect explanation. I'm sending it because if there are other districts, other stations, other places where rules start out sounding ridiculous and end up saving your life, maybe somebody should say that out loud. And because if anyone else ever worked a remote post in Alaska, Canada, the Yukon, the Territories, or anywhere else where the woods start behaving less like landscape and more like memory, I want them to know this. If the rules seem stupid, follow them anyway. If the voice sounds real, ignore it anyway. If you think you're too rational to be baited, you are exactly the kind of person that place likes best. I still have Harris's sheet folded in my wallet. It's yellow at the creases now. The ink is fading. But I can recite every line from memory. Sometimes, around 1 a.m., I still wake before the whistle comes, as if some part of me feels it gathering outside. Sometimes it never comes. Sometimes it does. 3 slow notes. Pause. 3 slow notes again. And every single time, no matter where I am, I stay away from the window and wait for morning. Because I think the worst mistake a person can make is believing terror always wants to rush you. Some kinds of terror are patient. Some kinds just want to be noticed. And some of them, once they have been, keep standing a little closer every year, facing away, waiting for you to finally decide you need to know what's looking back. That's my story. And I wish I could tell you I understood it by now. I don't. I just know there are places in the wilderness where rules are the only kindness anybody ever managed to leave behind. And I know at least one of those places is still out there somewhere in Alaska, empty on the maps, closed in the records, and not nearly as abandoned as people would like to believe. If you enjoyed tonight's story, let me know what you think in the comments. Tell me honestly whether you would have taken that job, and at what point you would have left. If you like this story, like the video, share it, and subscribe to Bella Dark Tales for more. And if you've got a story of your own, especially one you still can't explain, send it in to belladarktales@gmail.com. Until next time, lock your doors, keep the lights on if you need to. And if you hear whistling after midnight, don't look outside.